Philip K. Dick wrote 45 novels and around 120 short stories. He was a pretty prolific chap. But that isn't enough for some hardcore fans. They want more. Stories that PKD himself might have liked to read and stories that fans of Philip K. Dick would like. And so keen are they to see this happen that they've created a new small press publisher, Pink Beam Press. David Agranoff is the host of the Dickheads podcast that you may have heard of, and he and Keith Giles together are bringing back a festival to California dedicated to all things PKD. So the fourth running of that Philip K. Dick Festival will take place this year in California on August the 20th to the 23rd, with a pretty interesting lineup. I'm going to take a quick look at that now. Let's take a quick tour of the PKD Fest website. So as I said, it's August the 20th to the 23rd this year, and it's at the Fullerton Marriott at California State University, which is obviously in Fullerton, California. And it's for over 4 days, from the Thursday to the Sunday morning, if I remember rightly. So we'll have a quick look at the schedule. So it's pretty packed from Thursday afternoon into the evening. There's a live podcast. You can check out the website yourself, of course. It's philipkdickfest.com. And there's a series of lectures. Friday and Saturday in particular are pretty packed all day and into the evening with, drinks and so on afterwards. There's a Pink Beam Awards, I think the inaugural Pink Beam Awards. And as we go through the novellas after this quick run through, you'll recognise the names of some of the authors. But let's take a quick look at the speaker schedule, because that's quite impressive. So the guests of honour are Sarah Langan and Brian Evanson, who are both authors of one of the 7 novellas that Pink Beam Press are launching with. And Tim Powers, very interestingly, Tim Powers, the author, of course, of The Anubis Gates and many other things, who was a buddy of Philip K. Dick's and sort of part of his inner circle. So it'd be interesting to hear from him, I'm sure, at the festival. And there are others, some names that you might recognise. Jonathan Lethem, James Blaylock, Lavi Tidar from the UK, and then David Agranoff and Keith Giles are the co-founders of Pink Beam Press, and also the driving force between them of the festival itself. And they're both authors of one of the 7 novellas. Anthony Trevino is another of the authors, and so it goes on. There's quite a long list. So it looks like a full roster throughout the 3.5-4 days that the festival is on. So if you're in the area or a huge Philip K. Dick fan, then that sounds like something that you should absolutely get yourself around. At that festival will be the first ever Pink Beam Awards, as well as the launch of Pink Beam Press. Pink Beam's roster will open with 7 novellas, and you might recognise some of the authors as guests of honour at the festival lineup. Keith Giles, who's the co-founder of Pink Beam, says, "We created Pink Beam Press to champion the kind of science fiction that Philip K. Dick himself would have appreciated. Stories that question reality, challenge authority, explore consciousness, and force us to reconsider what it means to be human in an age of accelerating technological change. We believe that science fiction remains one of the most important literary genres for understanding the world that we are creating together." So let's take a look at the 7 novellas that make up Pink Beam's opening lineup. First up is Simcop and the Haunted City, which is by one of the co-founders, David Agranoff. Hundreds of years from now, Los Angeles is one of the last megacities on a dying Earth. Most humans have left, and the streets are filthy with illegal tech and experimental drugs. But LAPD detective Alex Garson has a problem. He's just discovered, and this is where the PKD bit comes in, I suspect, he's not human. He's a sim, designed to be a cop, and his partner was just murdered by the megacity's most notorious drug dealer, Domino Big Rig Wrigley. Wrigley has been flooding the streets with Lively, a brand new drug that makes Sims feel human. As if being a print job wasn't bad enough, Detective Garson doesn't have choice. He is programmed to do his job, to find Big Rig and to avenge his partner. Unless he finds a way to override his programming and kill himself. So David apparently is the Wonderland Award-nominated author of The Last Night to Kill Nazis and Philip K. Dick-inspired science fiction thriller, Great America in a Dead World. And for the last few years, David has co-hosted the aforementioned Dickheads podcast, which is a deep dive into the work of Philip K. Dick, reviewing his novels in publication order, as well as the history of science fiction generally. So if you're a Philip K. Dick fan and you're not aware of that podcast, it sounds like something you should get stuck into. Next is Services Rendered by Anthony Trevino. And in this book, Lee Horowitz loves his job. It's what he was raised and trained for, as the Cantrell Corporation's most loyal and reliable shadow operative, handling everything from silencing competitors to personal favours for interplanetary shareholders. Lee's entire life has been in service to the company, until the day a minor mistake results in his immediate termination. However, instead of loitering in the unemployment line or hopping from gig to gig, Lee finds himself stalked by the Reclamation Commission, a group whose sole purpose is to extract what they can and leave no trace. But even a former company man has some misgivings about being disappeared, leaving Lee no choice but to run headfirst into a city determined to exploit and kill him. The author of this one, Anthony Trevino, is the author of King's Space Void, published by Eraserhead Press. And he's also a comic author, and he's also made an appearance in the True Detective tribute anthology Walk Hand in Hand into Extinction from Clash Books. Next is Bloody 13 by Sarah Langan, who is going to be one of the guests of honour at the festival in August. So this book, then, Bloody 13, in a near-future New York City still haunted by the scars of the Y plague, fear has become fashion, law and religion. 20 million are dead. The virus spared women, but every infected man died. Now society clings to control in the name of safety. Girls are watched, girls are regulated, and the moment that they turn 13, they're required to hide their faces behind masks, even though science has long proven that they pose no threat at all. Most comply. Some even celebrate it, but when 3 girls begin to ask questions, they discover the dangers of resistance. So it sounds like a little bit, I don't know, Islamic fundamentalism meets The Handmaid's Tale. So it does sound quite intriguing. Sarah Langan, by the way, is the 3-time recipient of the Bram Stoker Award, and she's also the author of several acclaimed short stories and novels, including The Keeper, Good Neighbours, and the forthcoming Trad Wife, which is out later this year from Simon & Schuster. Next is Glitch by Brian Evanson, and this apparently is a mind-bending science fiction novella about identity, consciousness and memory, and the horror of surviving yourself. Glitch explores what happens when immortality becomes a prison, and when your own mind becomes your worst enemy. The blurb was short and sweet, wasn't it? Brian's got some game. He's the author of a couple of dozen books of fiction, and most recently a short story collection called Good Night, Sleep Tight, and he's won a couple of awards to boot, including being a finalist for the LA Times Ray Bradbury Prize. Next is Hard Video, a book by the co-founder of Pink Bean Press, Keith Giles. And if the eyes are the window to the soul, then Hard Video is the telescope to your future. But what happens when someone dares to turn off their device and take a good look around? What happens when someone asks, why don't we make reality a place we don't need to escape from? So Keith is a best-selling author and podcaster who lives in Oregon with his wife, and he's appeared on CNN with Anderson Cooper, Coast to Coast with George Norrie, and John Fugelson's Tell Me Everything, and many other podcasts, television and radio programmes. Next is the intriguingly titled Bubblegum Circuit Tower Dash, and this is by Andrew Turk. A hurricane is coming in and it needs to be stopped. Tower number 4 has drones to do it, but the tower's down and the city's a mess. And the only contractor with the electro-free running spark to bring number 4 back online is, well, he's dealing with a lot, okay? Big spiritual questions, the nature of he had a breakup, his friend fell off a roof, now the storm might take his ex. She's directly in its path and sleeps heavily on cardio days. Maybe we can get the president to just draw a line on the map and change its path. That usually works. Anyway, facing our hero, a 900-foot climb, no stairs, no elevators, and also the tower kind of sort of might want to kill anyone who goes inside. Should he manage to live, the contractor will journey through a story of metaphysics and DC currents, of lightning and quantum physics, of bubblegum pops and oddly specific muscle groups. Can he make it? Can anyone? Well, buckle up, because our genre, it's cyberpunk, and this novella has no breaks. The last of the 7 is Shadowboxing by Gordon Bonnet. And so in Shadowboxing, Zach Davidson is an ordinary 17-year-old boy focused mainly on running track and hanging out with his friends and girls and parties, when somehow he and classmate Andy Traylan begin to hear each other's thoughts. Their personalities have somehow become wired together. But it doesn't take long for Zach to figure out that this fusion has a very dark side, and that breaking the link might be imperative for both boys to stay sane. But is separation even possible without one of them dying? So those all sound quite interesting. They're going to be novellas, quite slim. I gather that the spines of all the books will have a kind of matching pink coloration to go with the name of the press, of course. I think I'm right in saying that those books will be released for purchase on the 4th of August, so just ahead of the PKD Fest in California. Keith was telling me that as of a week or two back, they were just sending the files off to the printers for them to be printed. They will be available in a sort of A-format sized paperback, so old school sizing format. And they will also, I think, be available in ebook. I'm not sure about audio, but certainly ebooks. So you should be able to get them from the usual places. But Keith also said that they're not stopping there. They've got Richard Kadri signed up for a short story collection. And they've also just signed John Shirley, cyberpunk legend, of course. So there's some big names. And he wasn't able to tell me who, but he is in discussion, apparently, along with David, talking to several other big name vintage SF authors, as well as some newer up-and-coming SF authors about releasing their books in 2027 and beyond. So obviously they're thinking, medium to long term. So it's not a one and done. So I wish Keith and David and all of the authors concerned all the best with the launch for Pink Beam Press. I shall watch that with interest. As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye for now.